After Durant had his surgery, I did a video talking about the kind of general time points that someone needs to hit after recovering from an Achilles rupture surgery. Based on the evidence Durant has shared with us regarding his rehab progress, as well as what history has told us about some previous players and their Achilles ruptures, one of whom actually was operated on by the same surgeon who did Durant's, I gotta say, yeah, I think he could return next season. But I think the more important question to ask is, should he? Welcome back, everybody. In today's video, we're gonna take a look at Kevin Durant's rehab progress and this question of whether or not he could return next season. I'm gonna walk you guys through the rehab timeline, assisted by the photos that Durant has shared of his rehab progress, to talk about the different points he's at in the rehab cycle and what he has still left to do. We'll wrap all this up with the question of whether or not I think he could actually return next season, and talk about, more importantly, whether or not he should return. Make sure and go subscribe if you like this type of content and want to stay up to date with future videos, and let's get started. The way these rehab protocols generally go is the surgeon who did the operation comes up with the basic timeline of where they want the athlete to be at certain points. This includes initially things like how long they need to be on crutches, how long they need to be in a boot, the gradual progression of coming out of the walking boot, and the degrees of foot movement that are allowed in the boot. All these different kind of critical time points, early on especially, is really determined by the surgeon. You then have different functional goals that you have to meet before you can progress from one to another and ultimately get back to your sport. Rather than focusing purely on one time point of return to sport, it's, I think, a lot easier to look at three different sequences. First, you have to return to participation, then you can return to sport, and then finally you return to performance. This means that early on, initially, you're just trying to get back into doing basketball and sport-specific activities. Once you progress through those, then it's about actually returning to your sport, meaning you're practicing, you're getting back into games, but the final step is really return to performance, and that means getting back to as close as you can to your previous level of play. Let's dive into the photos that Durant has shared, and I'll give you some insight based on the rehab timeline and what he's doing in these pictures. Durant had his surgery back in June, and so at the time of recording this, we're around 3 months or 12 weeks from his surgery. In order to get back before the playoffs would begin, he would overall have a return roughly 9 to 10 months out from his surgery. The initial photos that we saw here of Durant were posted around 4 weeks out from surgery. In this first one, he's using a knee scooter to keep weight off of his operated foot, and you can see he's wearing this orange cast. The specific position that this is in is really important for the recovery of his repair. This angle of the foot here is what we call plantar flexion, meaning the foot is pointed downward away from the knee. Imagine you've got your Achilles tendon on the backside of the leg here, and so whenever your foot is pointed downward, that causes the tendon to shorten. When you swing and pull the toes upward, that stretches the tendon and causes it to lengthen. So initially in these recoveries, the athlete has their foot fixed in plantar flexion to minimize the amount of stretch on that tendon as it's trying to heal and reintegrate after the surgical repair. He posted another photo walking with crutches, this time using a different sort of boot. But again, that foot is still in plantar flexion, and here he's doing some partial weight bearing. Most post-operative protocols call for some degree of partial weight bearing within that first month. There's debate about whether or not immediate weight bearing is beneficial versus waiting closer to a month, and so a lot of that is surgeon dependent. But in this early stage, he's not putting all his weight on the foot, he's simply partially weight bearing. Moving on to some photos we saw roughly 5 to 6 weeks out from his surgery, we can see he's still using crutches, so still partial weight bearing, but he's changed the brace that's on his foot. It's much less supportive and less protective, and it also has less plantar flexion. In this other picture, he's working on some balance on his uninjured side, and we can tell just from the angle of the brace in this position, it still looks like there's a little bit of plantar flexion, but he's almost nearly back at neutral. Then towards the end of July, early August, so now around 6 weeks out from his surgery, TMZ posted a video of him walking without any crutches, so at this point he's full weight bearing. Probably still wearing some sort of brace or support here, but great, he's gotten rid of the crutches. Everything still looks really well on schedule. Our next post from Durant came on September 4th with the caption of 12th week. Here we see him doing a couple of really key things. The first one here is he's balancing on just his operated side. The specific contraption here that he's balancing on is intended to work on kind of balance in all different limbs. And so there's kind of an elastic bouncy thing that he's standing on in the middle. There's different elastic bands you can hold onto and grab at the top. So all this is working on his functional balance on the operated side. This other photo he posted, I can't quite tell if he's working on stretching the heel or if he's doing some strengthening. But one thing I do want to point out in this picture is it looks to me like there's a little bit of atrophy in the calf muscle. Atrophy just means shrinkage, so it looks like the muscle's a little bit smaller. This wouldn't be unexpected. After you've had the surgery, you're not using that leg, And so one of the early key parts of this rehab is regaining that strength in your calf muscle, and this is a big key determining factor going forward as well. He also posted a photo here using this really fancy treadmill, something we often refer to as an Alter G, and this is a specific treadmill designed to offload your body weight so that athletes can run without putting as much load through their joints. It's essentially a tight seal around your waist, and then a bunch of air is pumped into this inflatable bag, and that air in the space basically lifts you up off the treadmill. So it can reduce your body weight significantly to where you're kind of doing the motions of running, but you're not actually putting your full weight through the foot. There's a lot of times when people going through their Achilles rehab are still in some sort of a brace or some sort of a support at this time point. Even if Durant would have still been walking with some sort of brace or boot at the start of the season, he still really would have been on pace. But at this point, we've seen him walking without a brace, we've seen him doing single leg balance on his operated side, and we've seen him start to do some strengthening and stretching of those muscles as well. Honestly, these were things I really didn't expect to start seeing in him until later on in the fall, closer to when the season started and just after. Everything that's going to come next is going to be increasing levels of functional activity and demand on that Achilles. We've seen him working out in a pool, we've seen him doing things to maintain his core strength and the rest of his upper body strength, which is really important. But now he's going to start working on more of that lower body strength and movement. I wouldn't be surprised at this point if he's doing some light body weight squats, and he's probably starting to do some elevated heel raises or calf raises. One of the big key steps to progress to is doing loading and impact activities. So he'll start off doing double leg jumps where he's jumping up, landing on both legs. Once that's going well, he's pain-free, he's not having swelling. Then he'll progress to single leg jumps where he's jumping on just his affected side. Then you start working on your single plane movements. So movements in just the forward and backwards direction, and movements in just the side to side direction. All of these activities have increasing levels of complexity that they'll advance him through based on the degree of pain and the degree of swelling that he's having in that ankle. Once you complete those single plane movements, then you're going to progress to more multi-plane, multi-directional movements. So you can get this common theme of starting off with basic activities and then advancing it to more complex, more challenging things. The key things to keep in mind as he's going through this process that could determine whether or not he has a setback or whether or not he advances more quickly are things like the presence of any asymmetries with his range of motion. If suddenly his operated ankle becomes much more stiff and he has less motion, that's going to be an indication to slow things down and step back a little bit. Similarly, if he has a lot of asymmetry with the strength in his calf muscles, in his quads, in his core, or anywhere, that's going to be another indication to slow things down and to take a step back. Also, if you experience a significant increase in pain, it's normal going through this rehab to have some discomfort in that area of the surgery, but if anything is persistent, lasting for multiple days, or is really severe, that's going to be another sign that things are progressing too fast and need to slow down. I don't see any indication or reason why they would be unnecessarily pushing him too fast through rehab. The only real thing that could mess this up is if Durant's having symptoms that he just doesn't tell them. So if he's doing an activity and he's having pain, but he tells the therapist that he's not having pain, that could certainly cause problems here. But I don't think there's a big risk of the therapist pushing him too quickly if they just make sure and adhere to those principles. Whenever we say someone's going to miss a season with an Achilles rupture, that's always an average. There's always people that rehab quicker, that heal quicker, and appropriately get back to sport quicker, just like there's people who rehab slower, have some sort of setback, and get back later. A couple examples to touch on from previous players. One is Rudy Gay. He tore his Achilles in January 2017 and had surgery by the same physician that did Durant's surgery. Like I said in the beginning, a lot of times these rehab protocols are sort of structured and set up by the surgeon, and so we can draw some similarities here. In the case of Rudy Gay, he returned and was playing on October 18th, just 9 months later. Kobe Bryant missed 8 months after he had his Achilles rupture, and yes, I know he hurt his knee shortly thereafter, but it's hard to know really how related they were. Bottom line though, players will get back sooner than 1 year. If you're appropriately progressing through your rehab milestones, like it seems like Durant is doing from what he's shown us, then it certainly is plausible to think that he could come back at 8-9 months or so out from his surgery. A 9-month return would put him back sometime in March, so before the playoffs, but probably too late in the season to make that much of a difference. And this is where that question of should he return really comes into play. We've seen things happen with guys like DeMarcus Cousins, where they come back from an injury, and even though they seem to be healed and recovered, they're always going to be predisposed to risk of additional injury. Psychology aside of what might be going through someone like Durant's head during a return like this, If the Brooklyn Nets are out of the playoffs, they're out of the mix, there's nothing really to play for, I really can't see him taking the risk of coming back too early unless there's just a bunch of outside noise that he can't get over. But if the Nets are competing for a playoff spot, they're doing really well, and Durant's return could ultimately affect the outcome of the season, then yeah, I think there's a real possibility that we could see Durant in a Nets uniform this upcoming season. Let me know any questions, comments, thoughts you have below regarding this whole question. Should he come back? Should he just declare himself out and not even think about coming back this season? What do you guys think? Thank you as always for watching, everybody, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.